What is up, everybody? Happy post-Thanksgiving. Happy post-Black Friday. Hope you all had a great time spending it with your families, eating all that food, resting off the turkey hangover until the regular life resumes tomorrow. I am joined once again by Luke of Luke Reviews in order to break down the two movies that we got for Thanksgiving this year. We got another Disney movie, Disney original, I should add, and another Ridley Scott historical epic in the forms of Wish and Napoleon. We are going to be breaking down both these movies, and then at the end, we're also going to, just catch up with Luke because we haven't had him on in a little bit, in order to break down some stuff that he's recently gotten into, catch up on everything going on in his life. Luke, what's been going on, man? How have you been?
I've been good. Obviously, we don't really do the Thanksgiving thing, so it's just been another regular Thursday for me. But yeah, I've been hooked on a TV show lately. I haven't been watching as many movies. We'll talk about it at the end. But I did another double feature yesterday of Napoleon and Hunger Games, which we'll talk about Napoleon today. And I just have one more thing to say. That is,
you think you're so great because you have boats.
Once again, get good with the sound bites there. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talking TV podcast. Man, be honest. How long were you waiting to queue up that soundbite?
it came as soon as I saw the movie. I was like, "Ooh!"
As soon as you saw
And
it,
I saw the
like,
clip was on
yes.
Twitter. I said, "Okay, I need to bring this one up."
You're like, yeah, it has to be. It has to. Like,
I'll give
oh,
credit. It's a funny movie when it's
it
funny.
is. At points, it is a funny movie. Like, we'll get into that and more. Like I said, we're going to be talking about Wish and Napoleon, the two big Thanksgiving drops. I don't know. Thanksgiving releases are always weird because I feel like that's the real beginning of like the holiday movie season, which is that everyone is like kind of catching movies on their own schedule. So you'll like have movies that have been out for like a couple months that'll like only start to pick up steam. But then you'll have movies that get released at Thanksgiving that don't do super well opening weekend, but then because of the longer holiday break, they pick up steam over and over again. My thought goes back to, it's ironic that we're talking about the next Disney original release because my thoughts always go back to the great Encanto fluke of 2021, which is where Encanto comes out in theaters at Thanksgiving 2021, doesn't do so well. They pull it after, I want to say, about like a week or so. Then they drop it on Disney Plus about a couple weeks before Christmas. The movie blows up, has a huge, huge reaction across everything to the point where they end up putting it back in theaters and it does even better than it did, than it did the first time around.
It's kind of what happened with Elemental, isn't it? It just kind of kept going.
Right.
Like they didn't put it on Disney Plus, but it just kind of kept going, and then it made a bunch of money.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That is exactly it. So while the Disney Plus, fluke, as I call it, will not be a part of this one, I will be interested to see, especially because I feel like unlike Encanto and Elemental, which for the most, you know what, I'm not even going to say that because Elemental got pretty mixed reviews coming out of the gate. But then as time went on, and more people saw it, that clearly didn't seem to matter. So I think it's interesting, obviously, with all of the flack that Disney has gotten behind the scenes in recent years and all the money that they've lost with streaming and everything going on with Marvel. I do find it interesting how people kind of like tend to glaze over their animated department because ever since the whole Pixar correction of Bob Chapek, where people were trained for 2 years to just expect every Pixar movie to go right to Disney Plus, almost completely devaluing the brand. And then obviously their first attempt to return to theaters with Lightyear last year was pretty big swing and a miss there. And, if not for Elemental this year, I think they were probably going to start considering some harsh steps. But Disney originals, those have always been in a strange place because since the merger of Disney and Pixar, and ever since both animation studios started using the same brand, when you saw Disney originals switch to CGI, which Pixar had kind of revolutionized for about 10 years at that point. It really started after Princess and the Frog with Tangled in 2010. I feel like the two have kind of become synonymous and interchangeable, where people don't really think of Disney and Pixar as being separate brands anymore. They kind of think of them as being one, even though Pixar still has its camp and Disney still has its camp, Like, for example, we had, I think the only thing that differentiated Raya and the Last Dragon and Encanto and Luca when those came out in 2021 is that Encanto went to theaters, Luca went right to Disney Plus for free, and Raya and the Last Dragon had that weird like pay $24.99 to watch it
Yeah,
for like an extended
it was.
period of
It's a
time.
very weird period.
It was a strange period to say the least, and it's one that, like I said, Disney is still recovering from, because if you look at the track record, right, Turning Red is the last pick, drops in February of last year. It's the last Pixar movie to go directly to Disney Plus. Then you have Lightyear in theaters in, I believe that was July of last year, and then Strange World, which was their Thanksgiving release last year, both of which bombed completely. Both of which got terrible reviews coming out of the gate. And then you have this year, right, which, again, it's strange how, given all the flack that Disney has gotten behind the scenes, but their animated department seems to be getting back to something of a regular stretch. You know, Elemental is, especially given that, like, I believe that outside of those two movies, they're the only two Disney releases, because this has been a pretty kick-ass year for animation, but it's been another one of those diverse years for animation, where you have Paramount releasing Ninja Turtles, you have Across the Spider-Verse, you have Nimona, which drops originally on Netflix, was originally a Blue Sky animation department before Disney bought that, gutted it, and sold it, and Netflix bought it and picked it up. What's it called? I'm missing like a couple others, but obviously then the other big Mario, obviously, which is Illumination. And then you also have the upcoming Miyazaki movie, Boy and the Heron, set to be released here in about 2 weeks, I want to say.
I don't think we're going to get it at all. I'll just have to wait until it shows up somewhere.
I'll see if I can get a copy and send it to you. But yeah, so it's been an interesting year for animation in general. And for Disney, like I said, low-key comeback year, maybe too soon to tell, because like I said, I feel like it's the year of just showing the power of animation that's made for kids over inherent quality, quote unquote, because Elemental gets pretty bad reviews coming out of the gate, ends up doing massive box office numbers, and enough people see it to almost where the critical reception turns around on it. Now we have Wish, which is an original. And Wish is interesting because, in addition to starting to implement the new animation styles that the other animated departments that, like, Sony kind of perfected with Spider-Verse, that then went on to influence other efforts like Ninja Turtles, like Mona, and a couple others that I'm not remembering off the top of my head, where you have like
Mitchell's Machines.
Mitchell's versus the Machines, exactly. But that was even a little bit more CG. But you're right, where it's you're rotoscoping 2D animation on top of the traditional 3D in order to make it. Like Puss in Boots as well did this, where it gives it more of like an animated feel as opposed to just like kind of feeling like stocky and realistic, which is kind of what CG had kind of come to implement. It's always fascinating to me how the technology starts to reflect the starts to reflect the storytelling technique as well, where it felt like for the longest time animation was trying to be realistic, and now it seems to have come back around fully. But what's interesting to me about Wish, a couple things. Number one, the fact that it is not it is trying to do what I would say is a mix of like old and new Disney, where I feel like over the course of the last decade, Disney started to branch out from their kind of tried and true fairy tale format, which they've done so well, and try to do spins on it. You know, you've got your Tangled and your Frozen, and then as well try to expand out into other genres. You know, Wreck-It Ralph with tackling video games, Big Hero 6 with tackling superheroes, Zootopia, which is really more of like a crime thriller than like having any sort of romance. You know, what's it called? And then
Zootopia is such an anomaly.
I still can't explain it to this day how that ended up being a Disney movie and not a Pixar movie. But I guess, well, and then when you do have right there, you know, and then Moana obviously being the third spin, Moana, and then most recently Raya and the Last Dragon being the spins on their traditional Disney princess tales. And what you have here with Wish, as far as adding to the most recent canon, is you have not quite a traditional fairy tale story, but you have more so, I would say, it's a fighting against corruption story mixed with a Disney Member Berries movie, because obviously since 2023 they celebrated the 100-year anniversary for Walt Disney Animation. There are a ton of references and callbacks in this to, you know, like the origin, like to Walt Disney, like you got references to Snow White and all different sorts of, and Cinderella, and pretty much every single Disney movie in the canon that you could think of. There's like little microscopic references here.
Did they have one for Bolt?
No, they didn't. Oh, actually, they might have. They
Ooh.
might have. There was a couple. There was a sequence where they were like doing Princess and the Frog, and there were like a couple of like running animals. And
Okay.
what's funny is when the credits were rolling at the end, they had like the little like in-stars outline of like all their characters going back to the beginning. And so when they did get to the late 2000s, they did hit some of the more underrated ones, like Meet the Robinsons, like Bolt and such. Although they did reference the Wild, which kind of pissed me off because that one's kind of I think
I love The Wild.
The
I
Wild-
watched it so many
The
times.
Wild's incredible. The Wild is absolutely incredible. I rewatched it this past year. I'm like, this movie's hilarious. I don't remember. I'm like, I don't remember laughing this hard at this movie, but this movie's really funny. But so, right, so you've got like so I guess I should probably break down what the actual premise and story of the movie is, which is that the movie takes place in another magical kingdom called Rosas, which was established by this king named King Magnifico. Little bit on the nose with that name there. And basically, his whole thing is he has studied sorcery, which grants him the ability to grant wishes. But the whole thing is that he basically takes the wishes and removes them from people and keeps them locked up. And then once a month, gets to grants people one of their wishes. And the impetus for this being that he came from a land that was ravaged by war, and so as a result, he believes that desire is like the motivating factor behind behind people's need for bloodlust and war. And so as a result, if he like takes it and controls it, then there won't be any more wars. And of course, naturally, you have our main character, who is a feisty young 17-year-old named Asha. That's Ariana DeBose's character, who of course is trying to apply to be the king's new assistant. And then when she discovers, unfortunately, that he is actually keeping all the wishes for himself, she determines to tell everyone, and this sets off a cascading series of events that eventually leads the king down a path of corruption and despair. And so I guess first off, what works for me is the sense that despite this having all the trappings of it being a fairy tale, it's really not. They're kind of essentially doing like this idea of like espionage and cover up and like corruption of power, which is pretty interesting, taking that from a Disney movie. Not to mention probably the most compelling villain that Disney's had in a long time, because the biggest thing that Disney had going against it, I feel like when it was doing its villains, is they would always have these stupid twists where obviously, the power of Disney for the longest time is that you kind of knew who the villains were. They were kind of coexisting alongside the heroes until like the inevitable buildup, your Jafars, your Scars, a lot of R's there, where you had them as like the advisory, the guy who has been screwed over and wants to take his rightful place, Gaston, Clayton, such as that, and then for a while you would have it where the villains in these movies would end up like kind of coming out of nowhere, where the movies would effectively be introduced with no villain until one of the characters who you knew revealed himself to be the villain, that being your Hans from what's it called, from Frozen's,
Zootopia,
exactly,
the lamb,
the little lamb, Mayor, what's it called, you get my point. So now, I guess what I can say is a first for me in this movie is this is the first instance where we essentially see the downfall of the villain, where the villain is introduced, right, as the king. It's pretty obvious that he is a villain, but because they give him such a sympathetic backstory, and because Chris Pine does such an awesome job voicing him, you kind of like are still not rooting for him, but like you understand every step of the way, even though he's becoming progressively more and more evil. And what's fascinating is seeing how he like basically is using real world tactics, which is deception, diversion, saying, oh, this person's responsible, being like, oh, you guys can't have this because I know what's best for you. So therefore, and anybody who defies me in some way just doesn't understand me, and I'm trying to help you, and oh, you're being ungrateful, that sort of thing. And what's interesting is, and of course they set him up with the what's it called, with the central character, the Asha character, the Ariana DeBose character, by having her simply be like, oh, I just want to be selfless. I just want to grant my grandpa his wish because he's old and he might die soon. And so therefore he's not going to have that much more of a chance for a wish. And it ends up being like a crack heist where they essentially have to break in and release all of the wishes. So with that being said, I guess just kind of what's fascinating about it is I think this is the first one where I feel like I'm still processing it, where I don't really have a firm grasp. Like, I don't love it. There's not enough for me to hate it at all, but I don't exactly love it. But I have a feeling that, I guess where my interest will be going into this is I will be interested to see how people react to it going forward, like whether this is going to have a good traction long form, right? Because it does have the advantage of being a princess movie, which definitely does help. You know, I think that's part of the reason why Encanto did so well is because, like I said, it's kind of mixing some of the old with the new. You still have kind of some of the traditional stuff that, you know, people love about Disney movies mixed with a little bit of new stuff. And Encanto worked because that really wasn't a romantic love story. It was put much more of an emphasis on family above all else. And also taking a look at a different lens of family, which I think what works about it in the long run is the fact that, once again, it is not really a romantic love story. It is much more so about just protecting those you love against like corruption of power, but also how power can corrupt those who seemingly come from a good place. So that stuff I think all really, really works well. But I'll be interested to see how that works with translating that to kids, specifically little kids, because as we know, that is still this animation department's primary audience. I think that what doesn't work necessarily is this is also a musical, and it has a lot of the Disney trappings with like the talking animals and the dumb sidekicks, and there are a couple of funny parts there, but for the most part, I think that stuff is what hurts the movie in the long run. Not enough to really detract from it, but like if I had to like nitpick and be like, oh, that's the stuff that like prevented this from being one of my favorites, I would say it would be that. But overall, like I said, it's enjoyable. It's there's nothing like too blatantly offensive. There's no wokeisms for me. At least not enough that are like really.
But come on, Dom. Disney has gone full woke with every movie that
right.
they put out.
Of course, that's right. They can't put out absolutely anything that's.
Did you not see
good.
the Marvels, Dom?
I did, unfortunately, and I as to Dustin's chagrin, I did not hate it. You know, I didn't hate it either. I really had a good time with it. I enjoyed it, and the irony being that unlike the first Captain Marvel, this one actually there were no wokeisms to be found, which I thought was kind of funny. Except for the only part that I really didn't like was the part where it became a Disney musical. But that movie was it was just like, it was so dumb that I kind of just enjoyed it. You know, it was dumb, but it knew it was dumb. Unlike Quantumania, which in a weird way, I think the reason why Quantumania failed, the more I think back on it, was because it was doing the opposite of what an Ant-Man movie did. It was where Ant-Man movies worked because they were always commenting on the ridiculousness of their situations. And this movie, they tried to take it straight and serious, and it did not work at all. But
in Ant-Man there were low stakes, and then in the third one it's super high stakes.
Yeah,
but
it's like they're fighting. It's like they're fighting Kang. It's like what? Yeah, but we're talking about the other Disney movies. But yeah, Wish, like I said, there's nothing like blatantly offensive to me, but it wasn't enough for like me to like be like, whoa, you know. I'll see if I like enjoy it going forward. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. We'll see if that score changes overall.
Where does it rank in your Disney canon of Disney Animation Studios?
Oh God, that's that.
Which percentile? Which percentile?
Okay, so now I have to pull it up. Out of the 44 Disney animated movies that I've seen, not including Pixar or anything else, I ranked it at 33rd out of 44. So it's still low, but the way that I see it is I like so many of the Disney movies that have, in general, in their canon, that like it's going to be really tough for them to rank that high. Like I have. Look, of their recent ones, like I have Moana ranked at 23, Frozen at 20, Tangled at 17, Wreck-It Ralph at 16, Raya at 13, and Encanto at 12. So like and then Zootopia obviously is in the top 10 at number 4. But yeah, so like I said, it just breaking and getting like a high spot in the Disney canon is already tough for me to begin with because again, so many of their movies are so good. But overall, yeah, like I said, the fact that it didn't suck, especially because after how bad Strange World was, like Strange World was like just. that you know a movie's bad when it comes and went and doesn't have and comes and goes. It doesn't have like any traction at all.
I like how in the Disney short Once Upon a Studio, the one thing that showed up from Strange World was that like blob thing.
Exactly. That should tell you everything that you need to know about it. But yeah, so like I said, that's really that's really all that I have to say about Wish. Like I said, it was a fun time. I'm never gonna like have too bad of a time with a Disney movie that comes out at Thanksgiving. Like I said, some good memories there. You know, Moana's and such. Big Hero 6, obviously back in 2014. But now we're getting to the big one. Now we're getting to what was I don't know how if this movie was supposed to be a big Thanksgiving drop, especially considering what was so interesting about the last time that Ridley Scott put out a movie at Thanksgiving, which was infamously House of Gucci back in 2021, which is just one of the most confusing movies I think I've ever seen. I look back at that review and am just confounded by my thoughts and just just the thought process behind the making of that movie. especially considering that we got Ferrari this year, which was the second instance of Adam Driver being directed to do an Italian accent. Well,
and he's playing Robert De Niro's character.
And he's playing Robert De Niro's
Heat
character
2.
in Heat 2, which is just, oh man. So they are really just trying to posit Driver as the next De Niro, apparently. I don't know if he's that far, but Ridley Scott, this one I feel like earned special exception because it's the first time that it's Scott's first major historical epic since that epic bomb almost 10 years ago, Exodus, Gods and Kings. Ridley Scott. So, Luke, before we get into Napoleon, right, which is his movie that just came out starring Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby as the titular French dictator. What are your thoughts on Ridley Scott as a director?
For me, he's been a little hit or miss, but when he really hits, he really hits. I think the two outliers. One, I have never been super high on Blade Runner. I've tried like multiple times. It's just never reached that upper echelon for me. I will try again at some point, I'm sure. I'm going to read the book that is based on just to try even harder. And Gladiator, I'm not a fan of Gladiator, but I think I need to rewatch that one. I just had this enormous expectation for it. Like it won like 7 Oscars or something. Many hail it as one of the best of all time. I thought it was okay. But when he does hit for me, you're Alien. Like that gave birth to like a whole separate genre of horror and sci-fi. Like we said in the pre-show, The Martian. Yes, the book it carries it mostly, but you still have to kind of put it all together. And of course, I enjoy Prometheus. As you said, you do too. I haven't seen it in a while. Alien Covenant. I was 15 years old, so anything with a xenomorph in it was very cool. If I watched it now,
and then you went, so you haven't rewatched it? Oh, I'd be interested to see your thoughts on the rewatch now.
I'll have to do an Alien series binge because I'm not huge on aliens. I think it makes them unscary. And then the last two that I have seen, The Last Duel and House of Gucci, I really enjoyed The Last Duel. It was the last movie I saw in theaters before there was another COVID shutdown, a brief one. And House of Gucci, I just put it on I put it on one day while I was doing homework. It's like, okay, I have this on my watch list. I might as well put it on. It's quite funny. Like,
it's funny. It's hilarious.
It's not great, but it's a very funny movie. You have the greatest transition in cinematic history with Jared Leto going like this, and then the car honk starts. And I think Ridley Scott, if he had done more comedies, he would have been just a much more diverse director. You can even see it in Napoleon. So the potential is there. Maybe before he hangs it up, he can do one comedy. But
the potential is there. But I guess just my one quibble with that statement, because you're right. I would love to see him do more comedies. Matchstick Men is a fantastic movie, and like just not at all a typical Ridley Scott movie is. The man is like 83, 84 years old. So I don't think that he's doing 85, exactly. So yeah, I don't think he's doing anything that he doesn't want to do at this point. And apparently he's already queued up, like he's already got his next movie set up.
Well, Gladiator 2 is filming now,
yeah, Gladiator 2 right now. So I would be inclined to agree with you that Ridley Scott is, again, when he misses. But when he hits, he for the most part hits big. But I would be inclined to even more so say that Ridley Scott, what's interesting about him is he's directed a lot of movies over the course of his now 50-year-long career. He's directed a lot of movies. The biggest thing about him, though, is it's not even just that when he hits. It's that whenever he has that one decade-defining movie, it like sets the course for the whole decade and like makes you forget almost everything else that he's done. I feel like in the 2000s and 2010s, like he picked up a little bit more. But so he gets started like later than any of the film brats, right? He's the last one to really kick in. Him and George Miller, they both make their breakouts in 79. George Miller with Mad Max, and then Ridley Scott with Alien, right? And then you have Blade Runner, which is only a couple years later. And Blade Runner is one of the infamous movies that helps sets the tone for the whole 80s, right? And even though he's got a lot of other interesting 80s movies, Someone to Watch Over Me, Black Rain, there's one other that Legend with Tom Cruise, which is so weird. Another weird one.
That's not a great movie.
Not a great movie at all. But see, that's what I'm talking about, right? In the 90s, same thing. Thelma and Louise. And then he follows that up with 1492, Conquest of Paradise, White Squall, G.I. Jane. Then 2000, right? Gladiator. And then one of the most confusing double releases of all time in 2001, Black Hawk Down, which also gets several Oscar nominations, and Hannibal, the direct sequel to Silence of the Lambs, starring Julianne Moore, recast in Jodie Foster's place as Clarice Starling, which is somehow almost as bad as the French prequel that they released about Hannibal Rising. That movie is just like close to being unwatchable. Then he follows it up with Matchstick Men and Kingdom of Heaven. Matchstick Men is great. Kingdom of Heaven, it's interesting, right? I do find a lot of similarities between this and Kingdom of Heaven. I'm going to come back to that, where Kingdom of Heaven comes out in theaters. Theatrical cut is kind of just gets middling reviews, but then the extended cut, director's cut, comes out a couple years later and is hailed as like one of the best historical epics of all time. Good Year, American Gangster, and Body of Lies. And then the 2010s, which I think is safe to say is like it was a decade that was not kind to him. Robin Hood with Russell Crowe, Prometheus, which has kind of come around. The Counselor with Michael Fassbender, one of the only movies that Cormac McCarthy wrote. Exodus, Gods and Kings, The Martian, and then the double release in 2017 of both Alien Covenant and All the Money in the World, which was the infamous movie that that they were forced to let Kevin Spacey go up in the wake of Kevin Spacey being canceled and replaced him with Christopher Plummer. And then Christopher Plummer ends up being really the only good part about that whole movie. Then, right, you have a couple years later, another double release with The Last Duel of House and Gucci. I'm glad that you enjoyed The Last Duel. I did not. I was bored to tears by it, and I found just the whole idea of, outside of Adam Driver, just Damon and Affleck in that movie is just being medieval. It just did not work. It did not work for me at all. And then House of Gucci, I've already wasted enough time on that stupid movie. You're right. If that movie was a comedy and intended to be a comedy, that would be one thing, but I could clearly tell that it was not. And so as a result, it ended up coming off a bit more like The Room than anything else, which is where it kind of ended up
That's a good shout.
It ended up being more unintentionally hilarious than anything else. And just the idea of Ridley Scott thinking that he's making a serious movie, directing Jared Leto to do whatever the hell he was doing in that movie, is just really, really funny to me. So that brings us to Napoleon, right? So this is the first movie that he's done in 2 years, right? I believe it was originally supposed to come out next year. It's his next like big historical epic. And we know that like Ridley Scott, when he goes big, he goes big, like all in. Like you look at all like the massive movies that he's done the last, like your Gladiators, your Black Hawk Downs, what's it called? Kingdom of Heaven, just how epic in scope and nature that feels with the multiple location hopping. And like the very like crazy visceral violence, certain action sequences that have gone on to I feel like it's between Ridley Scott and then Lord of the Rings that kind of set the template in terms of like big action spectacle, but also like shot practically sequences, that I feel that Game of Thrones pulled a lot from. And so you have a movie that is trying to be one part historical epic, one part like epic historical romance, one part just historical battles, biopic, exactly, all to build to a movie that I'm not going to say I hated it. I will say the reviews have not, again, it's another one where the reviews have not exactly been kind to it, but I guess I'll say this much. To me, it had more of an idea of its own identity than House of Gucci did. I'll give it that much. Like, yeah, there are some funny parts for sure. There are some parts where you certainly question Joaquin's performance and what he's doing. Like half the time, I feel like the biggest source of confusion for me comes from, I don't know if he's trying to play this guy as like a blowhard coward or just somebody who just like has aspirations. And like, because the way that Napoleon is portrayed in this movie, he's portrayed as somebody who is kind of just motivated by wanting to overcome his own perceived insecurities and self-image, which works in real life because, right, obviously Napoleon was famously short. He famously, the inventor of the Napoleon, kind of coined the term the Napoleon complex. But as a result, he was an absolute, he wasn't exactly the best physical fighter, but he made up for it with his absolutely brilliant, tacticians, the way that he saw every single battle as like a chess set. And was able to completely maneuver his enemies into his place. And he pretty much never lost a battle up until the absolute disaster that was his invasion of Russia, which of course resulted in, he did not account for the weather and how many men he lost as he attempted to make his way in. So unfortunately, just landscapes and weather settings were not his forte. But I guess just where my confusion comes in is I don't know what this movie's trying to go for other than, okay, this is just Napoleon. You know, I don't know what kind of a lasting impact this is going to have on me, other than like you and a lot of other people were talking about some absolutely spectacular battle sequences and set and production design. Like I will say that, like they definitely pulled out the bag. It's nice to see a movie that's actually shot on location that doesn't use a whole lot of CG. And I'm pretty sure that if you asked Ridley Scott something about that, he would give like some sort of sarcastic snide answer because
He's like, you idiot!
Exactly.
Like, what are you doing?
I believe he said something along the lines of, "Oh, the French don't even like themselves," because of course he was heavily critiqued by the French. But in case people haven't
I
learned by
feel like
now,
it's a British thing.
it probably is. But yeah, Ridley Scott does not give a fuck about any sort of historical accuracy or anything. He just wants to make an entertaining movie, almost much to his chagrin, because like I said, I don't know what he was thinking with The Last Duel and House of Gucci. But I will say I like this movie better than both of those two. Where it will stand in the Ridley Scott canon, I don't know, because again, it's the Ridley Scott canon for me is all over the place. But Luke, what did you think of Napoleon?
Well, just going into it, I was thinking like it's the Napoleon movie, but it doesn't feel like the Napoleon movie.
Right.
Like you have these definitive biopics. I'm blanking on them right now. I don't know, Lincoln or whatever. Just like, but this is like such a big figure as Napoleon. It doesn't feel like the event that it should be. Like Joaquin Phoenix, like, yeah, he's a good actor, but like Napoleon is that kind of like the direction to go for. And he's good in this movie. He's not like, Academy Award good, but he makes it work. He's weirdly comedic performance. I haven't seen Beau is Afraid yet. Is he like comedic in that or sorts?
What makes that performance work is that it's more of, again, that movie has, I think, as opposed to this, is that movie has more of a sense of its own identity, where he's playing it seriously. He's playing it seriously, but the material is such utter farce that he ends up coming off as hilarious. But he's not playing that for laughs. But because of the way that he's directed in this movie, even though he's also not playing it for laughs here, it comes off as just hilarious because of the direction and the characterization.
Yeah, so the movie starts, I think, where like the first battle is like right at the beginning. I'm
Yeah.
watching this battle. I'm thinking, oh my god, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
This battle is so good. Like horse gets destroyed
Not
by a
even just destroyed,
cannonball.
like takes a cannonball to the chest, and that's the, they do not hold back from the carnage. Like the movie opens with Marie Antoinette getting her head chopped off, and I'm like, every other freaking movie that we've seen with guillotines where they always cut away to like a wide. No, they keep that shit up close to personal, and you see that head go off, and you see them lift the head up with the blood and guts all dripping out. I'm like, oh my god, it's the Tropic Thunder scene, but they're taking it seriously. Holy shit.
Yeah, so the first battle happens. I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm in. You have my attention. You have my curiosity. Now you have my attention, and then it kind of goes into my wife for the rest of the movie. I'm like, okay, we get it. You like this woman. She doesn't like you that much. And then every scene is like, oh, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
Oh, and
I'm
don't
nothing
forget
without
the
you.
don't forget the impotence subplot as well.
Very, very, absolutely. I only wonder what remains in the 4-hour cut that we didn't see.
That's right.
So that really didn't work for me. So I feel like the whole movie was just that, like this guy like talking about his wife or to his wife, complaining about it, and like a jump scare sex scene. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, that was it's so confusing.
So then I was just waiting. Okay, there's gonna be like at least 2 more battles. I'll wait it out. And then you get to the Austerlitz battle, and that's just spectacular. You see, like that's where at least half of the $200 million budget went, and of course the battle at the end, the Waterloo, that's just fantastic. But everything in the middle, yeah, like you said, there's like 3 different movies going on here. You have the historical biopic, you have the romance thing. I feel like I guess I saw like a clip of Ridley Scott interview. He said that he didn't want it to be a history lesson, that he focused on the Josephine obsession angle, and it just didn't work for me. I wasn't overly interested in it. Like Vanessa Kirby was fine, I guess. She didn't have like a whole lot to do. She had to be sad in a few scenes. Like you said, the impotence subplot, like do we really need like 20 minutes dedicated to that? But yeah, the battle scene spectacular. So that was enough for me to give it a decent rating at the end.
I I think also another element that I found amusing, not entertaining per se, but amusing, was just it felt like the constant repetitiveness of just oh, this person's in charge. Oh, we don't like them. Oh, it's hard to feather them. Oh, replace them. Oh, we don't like this new person we put in charge. Okay, take them down. And it just felt like it was constantly over and over and over again. And I will say that in terms of pointing out kind of like the fallacies of that specific time period in French history is hilarious because, again, I remember specifically my teacher. I mean, again, I'll never forget this, going back to sophomore year history. And my teacher pretty much breaking down like what a tumultuous time, because it felt like the French just couldn't decide who they wanted. It's like, did they want a democracy or did they wanted a dictatorship? It's like we took down these and murdered all of these kings because we were starving in the street, and put in a council that was going to make things more fair. But then we didn't like how they were running things because it was taking too long for decisions to be made. So now we're perfectly happy with basically Napoleon coming in as essentially that version of Caesar, and we're fine with that. But oh no, he screwed up this one battle sequence, and now he's exiled. And that element to me was really funny. And I feel like if the movie had focused more on that, and played up a little bit more of the comedy, not as farce, but just the inherent comedy of that period of that section of history, I think it would have been slightly more successful. Because you're right, that opening sequence, holy crap, I was locked in. I was in, ready to go. Building up, from the execution of Marie Antoinette, where you don't see Napoleon for like the first 3 or 4 minutes, then you see him, then leading into the battle, and you see how his mind works in physical form with the battle, like how he structures and engineers his troops, and then that amazing sequence in the middle, where they're fighting the Austrians, and they lure them onto the lake and just fucking torpedo the lake that was in all the trailers. Like, all that stuff is great, but you're right, it's when they bring in the Josephine character that the movie just gets dumb and just doesn't know what it's doing, where it's like, oh no, the issue is like Napoleon, he cannot conceive an heir. And so it's like, that's where I feel like they're playing up the whole impotence angle for laughs, where it's like, oh, this guy's clearly really insecure. He's a brilliant mind. He's a brilliant battle tactician, but clearly not when it comes to being in the bedroom. And so he's kind of, and I guess also what was also missing is I feel like if they wanted that to be like the motivating factor for all of his decisions going forward in life, I feel like that was kind of missing, because it felt like that whole plot with Josephine and the impotence angle was separate from the whole being a battle tactician and taking over
I
France.
kind of end up forgetting about that. Like every now and then they mention like, oh yeah, we don't have a son yet, or whatever. So it's like,
they mentioned
oh,
like,
yeah,
we don't have a son yet.
that.
We don't have a son yet. It's like, oh, you will get pregnant or we will get divorced. And it's kind of just like, it's like, oh, we will divorce you. It's like,
Destiny has brought me this lamb chop.
It's like, I feel like there should be more here. I feel like I'm in a weird way. I feel like this is the one instance where I'm like, I kind of wish that we got more of an instance that like she felt like she was a prisoner. Like I like that, like she would like butt him back and forth, and like I said, that whole sequence where she's like insulting him for being fat in front of his commanders was hilarious. But I do feel like I needed to be more of, it's like, okay, she was in like a very precarious position of, okay, she's with this guy, but also is a prisoner, but also has to like maintain her one-offs, not to mention the fact that, again, a lot of affairs were mentioned, but were never shown. So I feel like I needed just a little bit more there as well. And yeah, like I said, it just felt like there was a lot of, this movie had the potential to be amazing, but because of all of this other weird stuff going on outside of the battle sequences, I just felt like there was stuff missing. But that being said, and this brings me to another massive, massive problem that I have with Ridley Scott, the idea of director's cuts. It worked once for me with Kingdom of Heaven. That's the one where I'm like, okay, this director's cut, the 3-hour-long director's cut, this is the definitive cut of this movie, for sure. And with Blade Runner, for me, I know there's like 4 or 5 different cuts of that movie. To me, the best cut is the same movie that we got in theaters, just cut out the voiceover. That to me is like the definitive cut of that movie.
But they're not like, there's another half an hour, right? It's just like
a
few scenes.
I don't think so. It's just like a few scenes, but not enough to like where it really significantly adds.
I know one cut has the unicorn dream and the other doesn't, or something like that.
Yes. But unfortunately, Ridley Scott, and like I said, there's a lot of directors that have done this, right? James Cameron is famous for this. What's called Coppola obviously did it with Godfather 3. There's a couple others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but
Zack Snyder.
Obviously Zack Snyder, right? But Ridley Scott is unfortunately becoming one of those directors where the whole director's cut, he's just using it to be gratuitous. Like 4 hours long. Like I can't imagine that there's another Like, this movie is already 2.5 hours long, and I can't imagine that there's another hour and a half of material that's going to really,
Unless there's a battle.
unless
or
there's
two.
another battle. But even then, it's like we
Yeah.
already have some amazing battle sequences already. So, like, what more could he add to this that would, like, potentially solve the problems that it is we have? I don't know for sure. Like I said, I don't hate this at all. This is not nearly one of, like, the worst movies I've seen this year. I do still very much enjoy it. But in terms of this being, like, the next, like, great Ridley Scott movie, yeah, not it at all.
Yeah, like you said that did you say it before the show? I think you said before that maybe it's time to hang it up for Ridley.
It might be. It really might be.
He's gonna keep going,
and
I
he's gonna
think,
keep going. He's one of those guys. Him and
until the brakes fall
Scorsese.
off.
Him and Scorsese, they're both gonna keep going. I mean, look at Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood is supposed to be working on his final movie at 93 years old. You know, mostly because I'm like, yeah, if he does, I don't know how he'll make another movie after this. I'm like, I mean, true, Godard was still making movies up until like his recent passing, but still. So yeah, it's just one of those things where it's just I think it's the commercial viability really of it, as opposed to like if he was more of like a niche artistic director, that would be one thing. But again, he has made his bones on commercial films. But
There was a pretty big crowd in my theater. Like I never go on Saturdays because I just couldn't this week. I guess Napoleon's a big name draw. I heard some people asking like, is this for Napoleon? As if they like just don't go to the theater too often. Like, oh, I guess people know some history they want to see. Just put the screen.
Right. So actually, that's interesting that you bring that up, because obviously this is not the first instance that they've tried for Napoleon, right? Nor is this going to be the last Napoleon project that we get in the next couple of years. So famously, obviously, you know, one of the great films that was never made, obviously, was Stanley Kubrick was originally going to direct Napoleon. Now, that was not the version that Ridley Scott was adapting for this one. This is more of like a straight up, for lack of a better word, a historical biopic / epic, whereas Kubrick's was going to be more of like an intimate character study. Now, the version that Kubrick was going to do, Spielberg is actually now adapting as a 7 or 8 episode miniseries that will be going to Max sometime in the next 2 years as well. So this is not going to be the only instance of Napoleon that we get. But in terms of, I believe this is the first like mainstream biopic that we've gotten about this figure, at least to my knowledge, you know, that
other than Napoleon Dynamite.
Other than Napoleon Dynamite, of course. But yeah, so in terms of this being like the first full-length feature film that was released, yeah. But I can certainly understand why people would be appealed to it for that. But just as a movie itself, yeah, I don't know. Especially once we get into that last half hour, like when he gets exiled to Elba, and then he's like, oh, I'm going to come back and wage war, but Josephine has died. I also think it's kind of hilarious where they don't even try to do the whole couple sequences, because as we know, the great trope that Breaking Bad started, which is coughing in movies equals death. And they didn't even try to do it.
Especially if there's a bit of blood.
Especially if there's a bit of blood. But they had one sequence of her looking, so they had her like being courted by this other figure. They had one scene of her looking sickly and coughing, and then the next scene he marches to home and is told by her daughter or something that she's dead.
I'm guessing that's where like the director's cut comes in. Maybe there's a few scenes there, but I'm not asking for it. Certainly.
Yeah, I'm not asking for it, nor will I watch it as it is. Like as it was, like I said, this is when the movie started, I thought this was going to be one of my absolute favorites of the year, and once it finished, I'm like, it's another 3.5. It's a 3.5 again for the production design and for the battle sequences, not necessarily for the performances, because that's the other thing too is Joaquin. Like, I don't know what the hell the thought process was here for Joaquin. I really, really don't, because like. Again, it's just from a performance angle. I don't know what they're going for. I really don't. You know, like, is he playing it for laughs? Is he playing it like he's supposed to be sympathetic? Is he playing it as a bastard? You know, like, because the other thing too also is we can't even really hate him because we don't exactly get a whole lot of like scenes that would make us hate him. You know, like he's not complex, but he's not like too simplistic either. You know.
Well, what I got from him is like, oh, this guy sucks. He got all these people killed in Russia and whatnot. Like, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Napoleon, man. Ridley, just I can't make heads or tails of it. I really can't. But
Apparently Pedro Pascal's fighting some baboons in Gladiator 2.
that'll
So
be
we have
interesting
that to look forward to.
that'll be interesting to see. Listen, I still just can't believe that Denzel Washington and Barry Keoghan and Joseph Quinn are going to be in it, or along
Paul
with Paul
Mescal.
Mescal. It's that the fact that, first of all, the fact that they didn't do the original script idea that was circulating around the internet for the last 23 years, which is where Maximus ends up time traveling. The fact that they didn't adapt that script is already frustrating me.
Maybe
as it
one
is.
day.
Maybe one day, because I've read that script. It's a good script, and it's an interesting idea. It's just funny because it's Maximus, and the fact that Gladiator has absolutely no references to anything like that. Like I can sort of see it. It is bold, it is ambitious, but it's just like it's more just like the how that was conceived.
Doesn't he kill Jesus in that?
I think so. It's like something absolutely insane. He like travels to the modern day or something like that. It's been a while since I've read it, but there was some good stuff there. But Luke, before we wrap this up, before we get out of here, man. So you've been we've been watching some stuff recently that we haven't gotten as much chance to talk about. You've finally been getting into the whole TV side of things. After our beloved Succession ended back in May, you've got a new show that you're quite into as well. I talked about it a little bit with our good friend Gal Balaban last week on our little November content dump episode. So Luke, what are your thoughts on For All Mankind?
I guess I can say what else I've been watching. I finished Loki. I really enjoyed the second season of Loki. There's a glimmer of hope.
Yes.
In the big mouse machine.
Yes.
But as soon as that ended, like Invincible, For All Mankind, Godzilla. I still haven't got a chance to see Godzilla, King of Monsters. No, King of Monsters. Monarch Legacy.
Legacy of
Monarch
Monsters.
Legacy.
Listen, they already screwed up by not putting Godzilla in the title of the show. So,
but apparently that's really good. I just don't see many people talking about it. So I guess that's just
I've
Apple shows in a nutshell.
I've been seeing it all over the place. I've been seeing it all
Invincible,
over the place.
I've seen 3 episodes, haven't seen the 4th one, but now they're not even releasing anymore until January?
Yeah, something like that.
But For All Mankind, this was a show that's been on my radar for a while. It's a big radar. There's a lot of shows, but this one was kind of just the sole ping that I was gonna watch next. I thought I'm gonna get Apple TV, watch everything that's on there if I can, and then For All Mankind was the first one. I thought, ooh, like from the first few episodes, okay, this is good. But then as it kept going, I just kept getting more enthralled. Like the space movies are like some of my favorite things. Like, and this is like 10 hours of the best of Apollo 13, just space stuff, and everything that's as interesting in space is as interesting down on Earth with their character relationships and stuff. Like, and that whole time period of the Cold War and such. That's like my favorite time period to study. I'm amazed like what people were like living in that time at the threat of nuclear war just any moment. And of course that all kind of came to a head at the end of season 2, which is probably the best episode. I don't know if would you agree?
I would agree. Yes.
Yeah. Just so much tension there. And then season 3 was just ludicrous, like a 3-way race to Mars. I'm like, this is just the coolest thing ever. And then we get to season 4, and that just about started. But I'm enjoying it. I'm wondering to see where it's gonna go. But Joel Kinnaman keeps getting older, and it's very funny.
He keeps getting older, and it's really interesting because it's like, people always criticize old age makeup and stuff, and I just thought it was funny where I'm like, I don't want to be that guy and criticize, but like I become too familiar with Joel Kinnaman as a performer, especially since like I think For All Mankind might be the best thing that he's been involved in, because Joel Kinnaman is another one of those guys that like was struggling at first to like find like some good parts for him. It seemed like Suicide Squad was going to be it, but then obviously, everything that happened there, he got like a little bit of a redemption. He got a little bit of redemption for what's it called with the new Suicide Squad remake, but then he was killed off in that. So you've got I didn't know this. He's actually been acting in Sweden for a while. He's actually in the original.
Swedish.
Yeah, he's in the original Swedish Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He's in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in 2011. Oh wow, I missed that. He's got Safe House, Lola Versus, RoboCop is where he really breaks out. He's in the first season of the science fiction show Altered Carbon, the show Hannah, Child 44. The Informer, Brothers by Blood, Run All Night, the Liam Neeson movie. He's just in right now. He was in Sympathy for the Devil with Nicolas Cage and Silent Night, John Woo's first movie in over several years. But this, I think, is probably the best thing that he's been in, where, again, it plays to his talents. And the fact that he is one of only, I believe, three main characters, I should say, that is still around since the first season, right? Because you have Alita, who was recast from the little girl who played her in the first season, and then his daughter Kelly, who's been around since season 2, but didn't come in until season 2. And with all the characters that have died since the first season, I think that it's him, Margot, and Danielle are the only three characters left from the first season, because everybody else has died. And so, like like I said, but
spoilers if you haven't seen it.
Spoilers if you haven't seen it, but I will say that, like, as far as the show adhering to its jumping forward like every 10 years with each new season, I really, really appreciate and admire the show's adherence to that, as well as just, oh my God, Apple TV spares no expense when it comes to shooting those big in-space sequences, because,
it goes back to Napoleon, because Apple made Napoleon as well.
Yes, as well. Apple is just like slowly starting to dominate the streaming space. You know, they obviously they killed it with Killers of the Flower Moon last year. You know, the fact that they are willing to actually put things in theaters and not just like drop them on streaming like Netflix does. You know, the Monarch, the Godzilla show, which I talked about last week, is so much better than I could have ever imagined. I'm already a fan of those movies to begin with, but for different reasons. But that was just something that I was so not expecting. And the Invincible thing, yeah, we'll get to that. And I'm still kind of perturbed by that, but I'm blaming that pretty much entirely on the strike. But yeah, it's been a pretty low key. Content is starting to pick up again. You know, after a couple months of some not so good stuff, I think things are, you know, after that disaster that was Five Nights at Freddy's at the end of October. I think that things are finally starting to pick up. And then you also saw Hunger Games recently as well.
Yeah, I do want to touch on just for All Mankind for just a little bit and ask you one question.
Yes.
I think the first scene with that in the show where I was like, okay, this is seriously good. I think in the first season, episode 7 or 8, they were gonna go to the moon, Apollo 24 or something. It was Ellen and Deke.
Yes.
And it's something broke, so they had to go fix it.
Yes.
And then it just started on its own.
Yes.
That scene was like, oh my God.
Yeah,
this is
incredible.
The best thing I've ever seen in my life.
Incredible, that sequence.
But I will ask you this, Dom. Who do you think is my favorite character? I like pretty much all the characters except like Danny.
Okay. Well, yeah, nobody likes Danny, and there's a reason why they wrote about it season 4. But so now let me answer that question with another question. Is it a character that is still alive on the show, or is it a character that has passed?
Unfortunately, they have passed.
They have passed. So if that's the case, I'm gonna say, is it Gordo?
It is not.
Okay.
I'll give you one more guess.
Is it Tracy?
No. It is. In fact, you want to go again?
Is it, what's her name? The one who is the one who died from smoke inhalation, the one who went blind. Molly. Is it Molly?
Yes.
Molly. I knew it.
Like, throughout the season 3, I was like, where is she? You could have done something with her. But she came back in the end.
But she came back. Yeah, she came back in the end. Yep.
Okay, but now we're on to season 4. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yes.
Koba from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes has showed up.
Yep, finally. He's also starting to make a comeback, finally. Ironically enough, as we're about to get another Apes movie this coming year.
But yeah. So Hunger Games, I was very surprised that I enjoyed that as much as I did. When the first trailer dropped, I'm like, ooh, this is a nice 50% on Rotten Tomatoes right here. I'm very happy to be proven wrong. But the second trailer was a lot better.
Same.
So that a bit of hype started to build up, and then turns out it's actually really good. And surprisingly enough, I want to see more of this world. I know there's no more books. We probably have to wait for another book to be written for that to happen. But I will happily wait, because it's a cool world, and there's a big gap between the movies that is to be explored. So I want a movie about how they build the arenas. That's all I want.
Yeah, I fuck the arena. I want to see a movie about the war, the first war, I should say, between the capital and the districts. Yeah, no, like I said, Hunger Games, not a franchise that I was ever expecting to be invested in or want to watch another movie from, and then this movie like completely solidifies. You know, it's like I was saying last week, is that the Hunger Games as a concept, not necessarily as a franchise, but as a concept, has aged really incredibly well as we've gotten a little bit of distance from it and gotten into the 2010s. I feel like when they first came out, it was kind of like it was just the Jennifer Lawrence show, and there wasn't much attention paid to like how intricate and detailed and actually fascinating that world was. And I feel like with the benefit of hindsight, you got a little bit more, focus on like the right elements. That could just be me, but and I like I said, we talked about it with Gall last week where Mockingjay getting split into 2 parts really, really hurt that movie. That should have just been 1 movie.
And Tape Recorder Bird, of course.
Yes, of course.
which is okay. Fine.
Yeah.
In this world, it works. It wouldn't work in any other movie, but
yeah. Not to mention that, like, again, also for another franchise that like everybody does pay, there's some pretty gruesome death sequences too. Like I forgot like how engaging the actual games portion was because
you can do anything in a PG-13 movie if you don't show blood.
Exactly. Apparently, like this dude, freaking. Let me tell you something. When they let those snakes out, I was like, "Oh shit!" Like that was crazy.
I mean, I knew it happened because it's in the trailer, but like it was still a very cool.
It was a cool visual when it happened. Like I said, even Rachel Zegler wasn't enough to ruin the movie for me. So there's that.
I'm not on the Rachel.
You are not on the Rachel Zegler hate train.
I've loved her since West Side Story.
I don't hate her. I haven't seen her be good enough to really like compel me in anything yet. I thought she was good in West Side Story. I thought she was good in this. She was in like one other thing that I'm forgetting. But yeah, no, she's still like, look, she's still young, so I'm not, and I wasn't gonna watch that Snow White movie anyway because, like I said, I boycotted all of I've boycotted all I have boycotted all Disney live action movies going forward, and so I wasn't going to watch that movie anyways. And she was good in Shazam too. I thought she was probably like the most compelling part of what was otherwise a pretty disappointing movie. So yeah, like I said, with that said, people, that is it. That is November. That is Thanksgiving. That is our Thanksgiving special. And like I said, only 4 more podcast episodes before the end of the year. Like I said, Chris and I will be doing May, December, Eileen, and Saltburn next weekend. The weekend after that, Dustin and I are doing another content drop covering a lot of movies that are dropping that second weekend. Then the third weekend, that's the big one, Wonka and Anyone But You. 2 of the most confusing holiday movie drops I've ever seen. So that will be interesting. And then the grand finale in which I will be covering Aquaman 2, Rebel Moon, Maestro, and the Iron Claw in 4 separate episodes that will then be cobbled together into one overarching episode. Also stay tuned because I may or may not have another couple of bonus videos planned before the end of the year. Luke, thank you so much once again for coming on with me to break this down. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They can follow me at Luke Reviews across various platforms. The year is indeed wrapping up, which means a top 10 video must be made. I did promise the people that at least. My 2 videos per year schedule must be kept up. But of course, school is very big thing right now. But I will make time for the top 10 because the top 10, the people need the top 10.
People need the top 10s. They love their top 10s. They love them.
It should be a good top 10. I think Hunger Games just knocked Barbie out of the top 10.
Interesting.
So we'll see what else comes out, like your holdovers, your maestros, your stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will be very interested to see what your top 10 is. And actually, I may have an idea plan for my top 10 of the year as well. But like I said, with that being said, people, you can, of course, follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talking TV podcast across all platforms if you're not already. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow. Like I said, happy post-Thanksgiving, and let's look forward to the holidays as we get ready for soon to be almost 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.